don't ignore this for now. This is just kind of going, you know, exactly what it says. I can go in and get cloud documents, which is the Adobe Cloud, Lightroom photos, if you've been working in there. And then you have a learn thing here. And then here you got create new. Open is just if I have an existing file and I want to open it. Okay. Now, another thing for that is if I have these files here, a lot of times, I don't know if you've ever noticed this on your computer, and I'm speaking to Mac. Windows probably has another way of doing it. And you'll double click like let's say a JPEG, and it opens up preview. You guys know what I'm talking about? I don't like it to open my files in preview. I just like it to open in Photoshop. So in Mac, you can just go click on, you know, a JPEG, let's say, and I go Command I, it'll give me this window, this info window. And right here, it says open with, and if it didn't say Adobe 2020, I'll change it. Okay. And then down here, I'll put change all, which means from now on, every time I double click an image, it will open in Photoshop. Okay. If you like to open it in preview, that's fine. Or if you don't want to do that and you want to open it in Photoshop, you can drag the icon out of the applications window, right? And drag it down here to your bar down here, which I have it right here. And then I can just take this and drag it onto Photoshop and it'll open it in Photoshop like that. Okay. Or you could go to right here and go open and pick a specific file. Okay, and I could double click that. But I'm going to go create new. Now up here, it's giving you sort of presets: saved, photo, print, art and illustration, web, mobile, and film and video. Film and video is going to have, you know, 1080p, 720, all the standard video ratios. Okay. Why is that important? Because like I do a lot of video editing. I might open a document and here's my, my document 1080p and here's my guides, right? The reason for that is that if I'm doing a logo or I'm going to use an image in my Premiere, in video, in Premiere, I know this is going to be the right size and everything when I pull it into Premiere. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay, so let's close this one. I'm going to go create new again. And this time I'm going to go print, tabloid. Okay, so it gives you letter, legal, you know, your standard stuff. If you want to change that over here, I always keep it on inches, but you can do pixels. You can do any of these parameters. I'm going to do inches. It's at 11 by 17. I could change those if I want. It's at 300 DPI. I don't want it at 300 DPI. I'm going to put it 72 DPI. And RGB is fine. All this is fine. And I'm going to go create. Actually, I meant to make that landscape. So I'm going to go here and rotate it. There. Okay, that all makes sense, correct?
Why did you change it to 72 DPI?
Okay, this is, I'm glad you asked that. Basically, 72 is for screen. So like web, things like that, okay? Not print, okay? 300 and above, but usually 300 is for print, okay? So if you're creating something for like a website or Instagram or whatever, don't go 300, go 72, okay? Because the screen only can see so much anyway. It's not really gonna, it's not gonna see all that. So it doesn't matter. The other thing is if it's a website or something like that, it's gonna, if you have a website with a bunch of super high res images, it's gonna bog everything down. Okay, it's just too big. Okay, the factors that change all that, or as we're going through this, the more layers I add are gonna bog it down, and then your resolution. Okay, and again, 300 is a pretty standard print resolution. Okay, you're never going to hand anything off to be printed at 72. Okay, and also don't do this. Over the years, I might ask somebody, I go, hey man, this image you sent me is 300 DPI. I need 72 DPI. I need 300. And they go, and they just take their 72 DPI image and they change it to 300. Okay. That doesn't make it a 300 DPI image. What that does is all of a sudden it'll blow it up bigger and it pixelates. Okay. And people don't know that. Okay. And when you're working on something, depending on where you're getting assets, because a lot of times when you're working, you're getting assets, especially if you're a graphic designer, you're going to get a lot of assets from people. Okay. Images, biopics, logos, all that stuff. Okay. The other thing is up here, and I'm going to kind of overview this, you guys. So I'm going to jump ahead a little bit today. You don't have to remember all this. I just want to overview it. Does that make sense? Because everything I'm talking about, we're going to get more into as we go along. Okay.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Sorry about DPI. Once you start off with a certain DPI number, you can't change it afterwards, right? That's what you're working with.
You can go down, but not up.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
So if you scan at 300 and somebody goes, I want 600.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
But you can go, and this is something you should remember, because I think about this all the time. If I'm scanning something like a drawing or painting or whatever, illustration, I always scan it at 300. Okay. Even though it's probably just, it might just be for my social media or whatever, right? Because why not? Okay. And then I color correct it. I do all the stuff that I have to do to it. And then, and then I save it or whatever. And then I do a save as, and I save one as a JPEG or whatever I'm going to use. And that one I reduce down to 72. That way, because then later on, if I go, hey, I think I want to make a book. Like I've been actually thinking about just making a book, just really for fun more than anything. But those should be 300, right? So I don't have to go back and rescan everything. And you don't know what I've had people come to me and go, hey, and one time it was just the Hornet or whatever, the newspaper or whatever. And they came and they go, hey, can we get that image? I don't know. They were doing something. And I already had it at 300. I didn't have to go do it again. You know what I mean? Because I think they do print. Okay. And then and I sent them actually a high res and a low res. So I went, whatever the name of it was, dash high res, blah, blah, dash low res, right? One more thing on that, just so you know, when you're working on screen, so you're going to have mode right here. And you can see right here, I'm on RGB color. Okay. That again is screen. Does that make sense? CMYK is print. Okay. So CMYK stands for cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. Those are the 4 plates. And I'll talk about this more later. Those are the 4 plates they use to create a continuous tone magazine. Okay. So when you've seen a magazine and it has this beautiful photo on it, and we usually do this in class, and I'll do it in a different way in here. I usually bring a loop in and we look at the loop and you'll see it's just a little spray pattern of those 4 colors. And those 4 colors make up a continuous tone. It's actually kind of mind blowing to me still, you know what I mean? And then like when you go on press, I'll talk about this later, but when you go on press, you have to know all that stuff, because like I was on press one time and it's a little pattern of those 4 colors. Okay. And they have a plate of cyan, a plate of magenta, a plate of yellow, and a plate of black. Okay. And like I was on press one time doing a press check, and I go, there's too much yellow in that, because they'll run it through the press, they'll pull out a sheet, and then they'll go check, that's what I check. And I go, there's too much yellow in this. And the guy goes, there's no yellow in it. I go, there's too much yellow in it. He goes, there's no yellow in it. He goes, it's not a yellow. There's no yellow in the build. Okay. And I go, yeah, it is. I was arguing about it and everything. And then I looked at it through a loop and there was no yellow in it. Okay. So it might've been the lighting. I mean, it can really trick your eye. It's so subtle. Okay. So I felt like an asshole. Right. But anyway, it's probably the lighting, or there's a bunch of things that can create optical illusions on that. Okay. And by the way, if you're a graphic designer, and I'd argue an illustrator, you need to go over and take a class on print technology, especially if you're a graphic designer, because if you do not understand the production process, printing process, and production process, and pre-press process, you are dead in the water as a graphic designer. Okay. Because you don't know what you're doing. Everybody thinks it's about making pretty images, and it is, but there's a technical side to everything we do. And if you don't know the technical side, you're screwed. Does that make sense? Okay. And I basically fired somebody one time because they didn't know that process, and they told me they did. Okay. Then they gave me quote unquote print ready files. And when I looked at the files, I go, these are not print ready. There's 27 spot colors in here, and you'll know what that is later, which is insane. Okay. And then I go, why is there all these you don't know what you're doing. And they go, oh yeah, I know. It's like, you've got 27 spot colors in here, man. You clearly don't know what you're doing. Now I have to go back through your file, which is harder than creating it myself. And I have to fix all of it to get it press ready. You know what I mean? You don't want that conversation. Okay. All right. So that's CMYK and that's RGB, these two here. These are the two that we're worried, concerned with. Grayscale is going to do exactly that. It's just going to turn it. It's going to get rid of all the color. Okay. Like if you're doing a black and white drawing, and you're going to throw it up on Instagram or something, you might just get rid of the color altogether. It doesn't really matter on Instagram. It's fine on there, but you know, and I like the, if I do a drawing, I like to have a little bit of warmth to it. That's just what I like. Okay. Okay. So let's pull this over. Now, over here, see this bar right here? What you want to start doing is when you're, okay, and here's the other thing. Under Windows are all your palettes, okay? They call them, it's under Window, okay? So for most of the things that are going on in here, you'll have a palette for it. So like if I'm doing type, I can come here to character and it'll pull up, here's the palette right here, right? So I can come in here and I can, you know, make it bigger, make it smaller, pick my typeface, let it, kern it, all that stuff. Okay. That's all in here. So in these tools, usually you have a palette and it'll let you go in and really fine tune what you're doing with it, that particular tool. Okay. Now, when you pull them out, like let's say actions, I'm trying to find one I don't already have in here. Let's try notes, which I never have used. So they'll usually come up. So let's say it's just floating, you know, my palette comes up here, right? If it's something I want to use all the time, drag it over here and see how it'll lock into that little bar here. And that way I can, and then you can move these around however you like it. Like I can pull this up here, down here, whatever I want to do. I like to have my layers and my swatches. This one is brush settings, brushes, you know, so on and so forth. Character, what is this one? Glyphs. I don't care about having that actually. Okay. And then the reason that's good, and you guys have probably all done this in other programs where you're working on a program, you get 40 windows open or 40 little, you know, whatever, things like this, like palettes, right? Put them over to the side so you're working smarter and you're not trying to get through all that crap all the time. Because then if I click this, it'll just pop out like that and I can use it. And then I can pop it back in like that. Does that make sense? Now, when you get this all the way you like it, which will be a while, you can go up here to Window and go to Workspace. And you can see I have one named Cmyk, right? So if I come down here and I go New Workspace, I can, hang on. New workspace. I can create a workspace. I name it Cmyk. And like if I get, let's see if it'll do it here. If I start getting sloppy and all these things are all over the place. I can hit reset Cmyk and it throws all my stuff and reorganizes it back the way I like it. Okay. It's a very easy thing to do. So all you gotta do is just go to workspace, name it your name. You don't have that problem anymore. Okay. Because a lot of times you'll start pulling palettes out and all of a sudden you've got all this mess all over the place. And the problem with that for me is that for some reason visually, and I don't know if this is everybody else, because I used to work really sloppy and I had all these windows open, I'd sit there and look for like 5 minutes looking for a particular window. I just wouldn't see them. I don't know why that is. And it's the same thing with my desktop. I don't really see icons. It's really weird. I don't know why my brain works like that. And maybe it's not just me. I don't know. Okay. Does that all make sense? Okay. Now, if you look at, when you open a document like this, a new document, a JPEG, anything that doesn't have layers basically, right? If you look right here, it'll default to this back, it says background. You guys see that? What that means is, and you can see right here, it's locked. This layer is locked, okay? What that means is, and it's gonna make a little more sense as we move along today. is if I try and, I can't really do much with this, okay? But if I want to, I can click this and it'll just automatically unlock it and it'll rename it layer 0, okay? Or, you know, and I can just double click this and I can rename it, or I can go here and just rename it and go okay, and it'll unlock it again, okay? Now the reason for that is, well, we'll see in a little bit, okay? If you're building layers on top of it, it might not matter, but sometimes it will. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's look at some really simple. So let's go to a background again. So let's go there, and I'm going to go down right here. So this is my layers palette, okay? Where I can do exactly that. I can just build layers on top of things. I can move them behind each other, around each other, all that kind of stuff. Does that make sense? Okay, so if I go right here to this plus icon, I can go plus and I make myself a new layer. Okay, I can name it. It's going to automatically name it, but I can name it if I want, right? So I'll just leave it at layer 1. But if you want to rename it, you double click the word. Okay, if I double click this bar, it's not going to do that. It's going to bring up this, which we'll talk about later. Okay, so if you're clicking this to rename it and you're clicking the bar and you're going, why am I getting this? It's because you're not clicking the word. Yeah. Now, we've got 2 layers here. So let's just look at these tools here, okay? So I'm going to put an object here just so we have something. And then I'll explain it later. So this little tool here is the move tool. It's exactly what it says, okay? I'm going to deselect this. So if I come in here, I can move this around, okay? Now, also, I tend to, right up here, if you look in the upper left, again, you don't have to remember all this stuff. I'm going over a lot of stuff, okay? If you look up here where it says auto select, I click that because I like that clicked. And it says layer. I can also make it group, but I like layer, which means watch my layers over here. It's not doing anything with that. But if I click an object or something on a layer, it'll automatically select that layer. Does that make sense? So when you're working, it makes it a lot easier if you just want to go, oh, I want to, you know, because you're going to end up with files that have a lot of layers. And I can just click an object on that layer and go, I want to work on the layer, and it'll jump over to it. Now, some people don't like it, and I don't understand that. Like, I don't know why you wouldn't like that, but some people don't. Okay. Hang on. That all makes sense so far, though, right? And by the way, if something doesn't make sense, stop me. Okay. Okay, so that's your move tool. Okay. This right here is your marquee tool. You have this one. Don't worry about the single row stuff. You have your square one, your round one. Okay. So what I just did with this is I just used this marquee tool. When you make a selection, you'll get these marching ants. You see them? Yeah? Okay. And I'm just going to fill it, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute. And also, look. Photoshop. Oops, I put it on the wrong layer.
So, Professor.
Sure.
So to take away the marching ants, you just click on the move tool, correct?
No, you'd go Command D.
Command D. Okay.
That's on Windows. I think it's Control D. On here, it's Command Apple D or whatever it's called. Command. There's a, and I always forget where it is. Hang on. Deselect right here. You see that under Select?
Yeah.
Okay. So, and then if you look over here to the right, you guys, you're going to see all your hotkeys. Okay. So, and I'll always try and show you where these are. Sometimes I forget and I have to go look because I just use hotkeys mostly. But here's the good thing about this. We're talking about a selection. It's under Select. Okay. Now, certain things won't fall that clearly in Photoshop, but some of them do. All your windows or all your palettes are under Windows. That's clear. Okay. You want to find more fine-tuned tools for a particular tool, it's under Windows, okay? Deselect, easy to remember, Command D, deselect, Okay. So if I want to deselect this, I would go Command D. And you can see I can, make this whatever shape I want, but if I hold Shift, it'll constrain it to a square. And if I'm doing the circular one, I can do an ellipse, all that sort of thing. And I can then hold Shift and it'll constrain it to a perfect circle. Another little trick here is that when you're doing this, and this will come in handy later, you can hold the space bar and move the whole selection around. Okay. We'll talk about that more later. That'll really help you out on a project we're going to do in here. Okay. So now we have that and I'm just filling it. Now let's look at something real quick. So this layer down here, like we said, it's locked, right? So if you notice, look on this icon right here on the layer. See how it just shows a little checkerboard? That means you're looking through, it's transparent. Okay. So I'm going to put this object on this transparent layer. And you can see it right there, right? And I can move it around because it's an independent layer. And if I turn this one off, you can see it, there's nothing there. It's just it's floating on transparency, right? Now, if I do the same thing here, so let's put a round thing here. It's on a locked layer, correct? And now it's fused to this white and I can't do anything with it. Does that make sense? And if I unlock this layer, it's still fused to the white. Now I can move the whole thing, but it's locked to the layer. Or it's locked to the white, okay? And it'll default to that background white, okay? When it does this. And you have your foreground and background swatches here, okay? So if I go up and I pick a red, if you notice the foreground changes, right? Or I could flip it, and do the same thing with the background. Okay. And then right here, I can flip these back and forth. Okay. So I have a selection here. If I go up under Edit, Fill, it's usually defaulted to foreground, but I can go foreground layer and background layer. That's all you need right now. Okay. I'll show you some other stuff in there later. But if I go Edit, Fill, foreground layer and go OK, it'll fill it. Okay. Or I can go Edit, Fill, background layer, and it'll fill it with that layer or with that color. Does that make sense? Now there's hotkeys for this. If I go Option Delete, that's my foreground. Command Delete is my background. Okay. I always use, most people just use the foreground layer most of the time. Okay. That was something that I don't know why I could not understand that concept when I was learning Photoshop. I didn't get the foreground background swatches thing. I don't know why. Okay, so let's refill this with white. By the way, right here, this little swatch thing here will default them back to black and white. That's their default right there, black and white. So I'm just going to go and fill this whole layer with white. Oops. I got to deselect that. There. Oops. There. So let's go back up here. One other thing, see the little icon where you can see what's on my layer on this little window? Yeah. I can also command click the little icon and it'll also select the object. Okay. We're going to really start talking about objects or selections for the next couple of days, at least, right? Probably into next week, right? There's a bunch of ways to make selections. And we're going to go from very simple selections to very complex selections where we're using channels and things like that because there's certain, you're going to encounter when you're using Photoshop, you're going to have to make a lot of selections. And I'll show you how to select hair and all that kind of stuff that's very individual little hairs and things like that. You can't just go in and do that with the pen tool. There's ways of doing that. Does that make sense? And we have to know a variety of them. And sometimes you're mixing and matching them. Okay. Because sometimes you get a document and you go, I don't know how I'm going to select this thing. And you might use a little bit of the pen tool and a little bit of the channels and a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Okay. Deselect that. Let's see. Okay, this is your Polygon Lasso Tool. We're going to talk a little bit about this today, or your Lasso Tool. This one, let's turn this off for a second. This one is your Polygon Lasso Tool. So every time I click, it creates a corner. And then see that little O or whatever comes up. Boom, that means it's connected. And now it's connected, got marching ants. Whenever you have marching ants, it means you have a selection. Does that make sense? Okay. I can also go in here and go Lasso Tool, and it's the same thing except it's freehand. Okay, which is fine. You know, it's not a very accurate tool. And oops. And then the magnetic lasso tool is weird. It's really, I don't know, I never use it, but it literally magnetically clicks onto the object like that. Does that make sense? I just did it all crappy. Does that make sense though? It's
That's good if you have a shaky hand or something.
To be honest with you, it's not a very good tool. This one, the magnetic lasso tool, I don't think I've ever used it. And then the other one is this one that you got to be careful with, is this one, which is the magic wand tool, which what this does is when I click on something, based on the color and the value and stuff, it'll try and select all of it that you're asking it to select. Okay. It's like in this case, it's probably fine. Okay. Because I have it on pure white, pure color. Okay. If there's one telltale thing that you used to always see people's work, and you still do, would be selections in their portfolio or whatever that were all fringy on the edges, like sloppy, fringy. It's because they were using this tool. Okay. Which tells you right away, don't hire this person. Okay. They're amateurish and they don't really know what they're doing. Okay. And it's not just that they're using the wrong tool, it's that their eye doesn't see how crappy that looks, which tells me they don't have a very sophisticated sense of design. Okay. Okay. So, but you know, here and there, everything I'm saying, there's exceptions to the rule. Okay. And I could probably go on YouTube and find somebody who's doing something amazing with the magnetic lasso tool, fine, whatever, you know, probably. Now, the other thing you're going to see, oh, and this too, you guys, right up here is your control bar. What's going to happen if you look, if I switch my tool, watch a control bar, it'll switch to the really common usages of that particular tool. Okay. So it's sort of a simplified version of your palettes that we talked about that are under your windows. Does that make sense? Okay. So if you're going to see this with a lot of tools in here, like if I go to the magic wand tool, right here, it says tolerance. And what that means is if I had a more complex bunch of things in here, you know, colors and things, it's really just saying how much of this do you want to grab? So if I'm trying to grab all the red and I have it at 40 and it grabs the red and spills out into some other colors, I'll pull it back. I'll go, okay, I'll try 35. And it's still spilling out and capturing other colors. I'll pull it back and it might end up down to 23 and it's just capturing what I want. So it's just how strong it is really. Does that make sense? And you're going to see variations of that idea. And you're going to see certain things in Photoshop, like any program, that you sort of see over and over again. Okay. And this is one of them. Tolerance is one of them. And they'll have different names for it, but it's kind of all the same thing, right? Sometimes it's strength. Sometimes it's flow, you know, it's just different things. Okay. But it's kind of all doing the same idea. How much of this do you want? You got to sort of dial it in. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Crop. That's obvious. I just click that. I can pull this in and crop it however I want, right? Simple. And I'm going to bypass a lot of these right now because I don't want to overwhelm you with a bunch of stuff. I'm going to the kind of big ones. Okay. This, I don't want to do that right now. Okay. So this one right here is your eyedropper tool. So if I have this and you'll understand why we would do this later. But if I go, I want this color right here, then I grab my eyedropper tool and I go bink and I grab it and it changed my foreground color. So now I could go use it. So if I use my brush, now I have that color. And then I can come in here and grab this color and I could come in here and whatever, repaint this or whatever I'm doing. Okay, so it just samples the color. Does that make sense? Again, almost nothing in Photoshop is 100%. Okay, does that make sense? You know, because people go into Photoshop and they go, oh, cool, the object selection tool, cool. And it's like, it didn't work for the picture you're using. And they just use it, which is super weird. You'll see this if you go online and do like Photoshop fails, you'll find all kinds of funny stuff that people do with Photoshop, okay? And it's just totally weird. They leave big watermarks on it from Shutterstock. They do just weird stuff. Okay, so that's your, whatever you call, eyedropper. We'll get into this later. I don't want to get into this yet. Here's your, go ahead.
Professor, with the eyedropper, can you save palettes like how you were just in that cloud thing? Can you just go and get drop, drop, drop and
You
set
can
something up
save
like that?
palettes. Yes, you can save palettes. I'll get into that a little more later.
Okay.
Are you talking about saving them into the Adobe Cloud?
I don't know. I just meant like, let's say you like some colors and you just wanted to keep them around and,
Yes.
you know, and reuse them or something.
Yes, you could do that. You can create custom palettes. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't want to go into that yet, but we will.
Okay.
And they broke this out this way. I don't like that, but anyway. Okay, so that's that. Right here is your brush tool, which is just what it says. You can do that with it. Right here is all your different brushes. Okay, this is my favorite one here for drawing. And then here, size, can make it bigger. This one I can't adjust the softness or hardness of it. So here, let's try this one right here. So let's go bigger. And then I could come here and go, I don't want it that soft. I'm going to pull it up and make it a little harder edged. Does that make sense? And by the way, and we'll get into this later, you don't have to remember it. The brackets make it bigger or smaller. And then I always forget this one. Then you hold shift in the brackets and that'll make it softer or harder. Okay. And you'll get used to all that stuff later.
Professor?
Yeah.
By softer and harder, do you mean sharper?
Yeah, look. So here it is. Let's go completely soft edged. So here's the hardness thing. Really soft, airbrushy. And then I'm going to go all the way to 100 the other way. See?
Very well, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I have a lot of brushes in here. I'm going to give you guys down the line. I'll give you guys all my brushes, all my smudge tools, all that stuff. Okay. So I'm going to give you a big giant library of really good brushes. Okay. By the way, I expect you to buy those when you're, I know students are broke. I'm not supposed to do that. I do believe in paying people for their work, but I also need you guys to have a good selection of brushes when we get later on down the line. And I'm not going to ask everybody to go out and spend whatever, $50 on brushes. Okay. But you wouldn't want people not paying for your work. Okay. So that's that one. Okay. And then today we'll talk a little more about this. This is your clone stamp tool. So if I take, let's see if we can do it with this. Oh, crap. I saved that. Okay. So if this is your clone tool, okay? If I want to create, let's say I want to put this cloud started up here. Does that make sense? And I'm going to, this brush is a soft brush. I like to have a soft brush for this kind of thing. Now, and I adjust it. Now, another thing I always do with this is I drop if you look right here, here's another thing. In your control bar, I have an opacity, which means let's pick this color here. Oops. That's 100%. this is 47%. It's not as opaque. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
When I tend to, and I probably not just me, when I'm painting, when I'm doing any of this kind of stuff, I tend to dial it down a little bit because I don't want to hit it hard like that, because then it reveals too much that I've been photoshopping it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I'm going to drop this opacity down to, I don't know, maybe 86. Let's try that. I'm going to soften this brush up because I don't want hard edges here. Okay. And then I'm going to shrink my brush down. And then here's the trick. I have to hold Option. Let's say I want to sample this. I have to hold Option and I get that. Okay. Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry. I got to go into my stamp tool. I got to hold Option and I'll get that. Okay. And then what that's doing is going, okay, once I click it, it's going, that's what I want to sample. Okay. So now I'm going to click it. And then when I go up here, oops, that's weird. Why is it not letting me do that? It's weird. It's not doing it. Hang on. Oh, look right here. I'll talk about this later, but it's changed my overlay to darken. Whenever you have this problem, I don't know why Photoshop does this. Sometimes it changes that. It needs to be on normal. So that's the first thing I always check when something like that happens. And now you can see, can you guys see the little crosshairs where I originally started this? That's what it's sampling from. So if I go off of this, I can start to build this. And I can start sampling this cloud. I'd have to do work on it afterwards. Why? Because I don't want it to just look like it's repeating. That's a dead giveaway, obviously, right?
Mhm.
And we'll talk about that later. But does that make sense? You go Option, click what you want to sample, then go up where you want. But you got to keep your eye on that little crosshairs because that's where you're pulling from. And if it go, like sometimes you'll go over and you start grabbing something you don't want, you got to watch what it's grabbing. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay. And you got to be really careful with that tool, okay? It can get real repeaty and really gross looking really fast, okay? You got to, all these tools, again, what we're going to be doing, you have to use them artistically. And at first, what we're going to start doing today, I'm not worried about that at all, okay? I just want to make sure you know how to use the tool, okay? And then we have pattern stamp tool. I don't want to do that yet. We'll do that later. Here's your eraser. It's exactly what it says. It's an eraser. And by the way, the eraser, the brush, the stamp tool, they all act the same up here. If you notice, I can come up here. I can make that eraser softer, bigger. And in some cases, I can assign a different brush to it. Okay. So this one, and a lot of them, they'll behave like just your brush settings. Okay. This is your smudge tool. Smudges stuff. Okay. That's why it's got a little finger. It's like a little finger painter, right? And then we've got a blur tool. We'll probably get into that later. I mean, it just does what it says. I can just come in here and very specifically blur out certain areas. And if you look up here, there's that thing I just talked about, strength. So in this case, it's calling it strength. Okay. The other thing, it was tolerance, right? And that's just how much of that tool do I want? So that's a little more. You can see it's starting to blur it. What's nice about that is that when you use the blur filter, it blurs the whole thing, basically. And this allows me to blur just certain areas, okay? Then right here, you've got Sharpen. I don't care about that. Smudge, blur. Okay, we don't care about those yet. And then here, this one right here, the sponge tool. If you look up here, it has saturate and desaturate. So I'm going to put it on saturate. And again, it has flow. That's the strength, okay? And if I go in here and I start, see how it just totally pushes the saturation, okay? Or I can dial it down. Now, who was the one who's into photography? I know who it is. I'm pointing at you. What's your name?
Lily.
Okay, it comes in very handy when you're doing like very specific color correction on photos, okay? Where you might just go, oh, they're catching a little bit of a cool light on that one side of their face. I want to just push that a little bit. And then you could dial the strength way down and make it really subtle. You know what I mean? Because you'll notice one thing you'll probably already have noticed. A lot of times with photos, you've got to kind of rejuice them again. Like you take a photo of something, you go, that doesn't look nearly as colorful as it looked when I was looking at it. So I'm going to come in. The first thing I do is I usually just juice the whole thing a little. Then I might start coming in and painting certain things and saturating just certain areas that I remember. I know how it, and I'm also a painter, so I know how light works. You know what I mean? So I come in and I do all that stuff, right? This obviously is a ridiculously overdone version of it, but I want to make my point, okay? Now, the other thing you can do is you can switch it to desaturate, and let's put that at 100, and it completely takes the color out of it, and it just desaturates it, okay? It's a very handy tool, okay? I mean, everything in here is really. Here's your pen tool. So let's look at this, the dreaded pen tool. You have to learn how to use this, okay? So when you get into more complex selections, you're going to use this. And here's the trick with the pen tool. Then everybody goes, oh, okay, I got a selection. This is not a selection. This is a path, okay? So I've got to go to my palette, which lives where?
Under Windows? Yeah.
Thank you. So I'm going to go to, I already have it here. It's right here, but it lives right here. Paths. I already have it over here. There it is. You see it? Okay. And it says work path. Okay. So remember we could click the little icon in the layers and reselect our selection on the layer. It works in here too. And you're going to see it works across a lot of things in Photoshop. So I'm going to command click the little image and it turns it into a selection. So now I could fill it or do whatever I want with it. Does that make sense? By the way, when you're doing something in Photoshop, it's going to work inside the selection and not outside the selection. Okay. So another thing to look for if you're going like, how come I can't paint anything? Go Command D, because sometimes you have like a pixel selected and you can't even see it and it won't do anything outside of that selection. And it might be so tiny you can't see it. Does that make sense? So when I go to paint or do something like that and nothing's happening, I go here where we just talked about right there to make sure this is on normal, because I don't know why you just saw it, it shifts. I don't know why it does that once in a while. I check there. And if that doesn't do it, I go Command D and make sure I don't have anything selected. Does that make sense? Because if I select this now and I go, oh, I want to paint red outside of this, it's not going to let me do it. See what I mean? But it'll let me paint in here. Okay. And it's the same thing if we have something selected in an image. I might select a person out of a forest and make and invert the selection and make the forest black and white, and then keep the person color or whatever. Okay, so that's that. Okay, and then here's the thing with the pen tool. You want to go, when you're making curves with it, you want to click and then go over where, and this will become intuitive, okay? And then I'm going to click here and then I pull my curve. Does that make sense? And then, and then I can come down here. And then if I want to do like a sharp edge, I can hold Option and it'll let me do sharper edges, okay? Also, I can go here to my white arrow tool, and you see it gives me, if I just go over this, now I can readjust it using my Bezier curves, okay? And again, if I hold Option, okay, that's just normal, okay? If I hold Option, oops, it will only it'll make a corner. So if I need to do that, it'll let me do a corner. All you got to remember when you start playing with this is just Option's going to make that little corner thing, and command, I think will take you back to your regular one. Wait, let's see. Yeah. So command's going to take you to your white arrow tool. Your white arrow tool is what will give you these. And also I can move the points.
On a PC, would that be Alt?
Probably, yeah. Alt would be option. Control, I think, is command. And by the way, they're ergonomically all screwed up in Windows, by the way. So if I hold command, gives me that. You know, and I can go in here and I can tweak it. The thing you just got to remember is if you're doing a, like I said, if you're doing a curve, and you'll get used to it where you kind of can gauge them. You go, okay, I'm going to do a big wide curve right there, you know. And then, okay, while I have it on the pen tool, I can hold command, I get my white arrow tool. And then if you notice, this is dark, this isn't. That means this isn't selected. Okay. And if I want to deselect all these, I could just do that and go here and just select this one. Oops. This one point. I need to do that though with my white arrow tool, because if I do it with the black arrow tool, it moves the whole thing. Does that make sense? If you've been an Illustrator, it's the same thing. Does that make sense on the pen tool? Okay. And that you have to go to your paths palette and click and activate it as a selection when you want it to be a selection. It's not automatically a selection. You can also save that path, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Okay. And then here's your white and black arrow tool, which we just talked about. Black arrow tool grabs everything. White arrow tool, you can adjust certain points. Make sense? And again, if I grab my white arrow tool, I can go like that and it gives me my Bezier curves or my handles. This I don't care about. This, or not right now anyway. Rectangle tool, blah, blah, blah. Here's your hand tool. This isn't high enough. Let's make it bigger. Okay. Now I can also go space bar and do that. Okay. To move it around. Does that all make sense?
Just quick question on the pen tool. Do you have to join the lines together to make them active or something?
To make a selection.
Okay.
Let's take this one. It'll probably join it just on its own. So let's take this one or one of them. Let's go to our pass palette right here. And I'm just going to I'm going to command click the little icon. Yeah, it just connects the points that are open with a straight line. Okay. So I want to control that. I want to close it.
So is this a way of doing like the magic wand, but more specific, like to have control in a way?
Yes.
Okay.
Don't think of the magic wand tool at all.
Okay.
Yes, it's a way of doing a couple of things. It's not just making a selection. I also might be making shapes to fill.
Ah, okay. I got it. Okay.
So there's a million
Oh,
things.
there's a lot of uses. Yeah.
Yeah,
Whoa.
it's got a
A lot of
million.
things.
Okay.
Yeah.
And by the way, it's going to be in Premiere. It's going to be in Illustrator. It's going to be in InDesign. It's going to be pretty much in any program you use. Okay.
Okay.
If you're going into Frank's animation class or anybody's animation class, you'd better know the pen tool. He just sent me an email or a text like 2 days ago, and he's like, make sure they know the pen tool. Otherwise they suck in animation. And I go, okay, okay, so that's those. Okay, and then we have our swatches here. Okay, and that's pretty much the ones I want to talk about right now. Wait, oh no, there's one other one. Here's your dodge. Let's go to the burn tool. And again, okay, so this one has a little thing up here where it's like, do you want me to affect the midtones? Do you want me to affect the shadows? Or do you want me to affect the highlights? Also midtones. And then exposure in this case is how strong it is. Just like, do you see that connection there? Like you can adjust the strength of a lot of these tools, okay? So again, I'm gonna put it all the way up and make it super gross. Oops. That's weird. It's not doing anything on this. Hang on. Yeah, that is weird that it's doing that. Might be the color, but I don't think, there it goes. I don't know why it had to go on highlights. That doesn't make any sense. But so what this does is it darkens. Does that make sense? Photoshop was originally designed, obviously, to be a digital darkroom. Okay, so a lot of the terminology and it still hangs around. Dodging is what you used to do in the darkroom. You'd cup your hands. You'd have your exposure sheet down there, your paper. You'd have your enlarger up here, and you'd cup your hands or however you want to do it, and you'd direct the light to certain areas and darken certain areas, or the opposite, you'd dodge certain areas and they get lighter. See that? Okay, so dodge is lighter, burn is darker. Okay, what you got to be careful with that particular tool is you can see how dirty it is. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
And I get people, and this is something you see all the time, whether it's color or photo correction or especially painting and stuff. They just go, oh, I want a darker value. And they go in with that ugly, and it just uglies up all their color. Does that make sense? You want
Yeah.
color in your color, not just black. Okay. So you got to be really careful with it. And same thing with the dodge tool. It blows everything out towards white. Okay. That's not necessarily what color does. And if you're doing that, especially in photo correction, it's just going to look like
It's
crap.
ugly.
It's going to look really amateurish. Okay. And you're going to hear me say that word a lot. You don't want your work to look amateurish. Okay. If your work looks amateurish, you're not going to work. All right. And plus, I just don't want my work to look amateurish, period. Okay. Does that all make sense, you guys? Okay. Let me make sure I don't want to get into that yet. Real simply, also right here, you have a type tool. Let's get rid of this. You have a type tool. So I selected my type tool, and if I click it, it's dropping in lorem ipsum, which is just Greek type, which means just stand-in type. And I can go, and if you notice, it creates its own little layer here for type. Okay. Now, another thing, if I want to select this type, I can just double click the T and it'll select it. And then I can, change it. Okay. Do that. Take my move tool. I can move it around. Now I can also go Command T. Okay. This is going to be a key thing, which is transform, which I always forget where it lives, right here. I guess it's free transform. Command T. What that'll do is it'll put a box around things and I can adjust them. Now, Photoshop changed this on this version. Okay. It used to be if you wanted to constrain something. So look, if I want to make this bigger but keep the proportions, I don't have to hold shift anymore. You used to have to hold shift. Now it's the opposite. Does that make sense? If I want to constrain it and keep the proportions correct, I don't have to hold anything. All I got to do is grab a corner and do that. If I do want to squash it or stretch it, now I have to hold shift if I want to do something like that. Does that make sense? Used to be the opposite. I don't know why they changed this. It's stupid. And then they also didn't change it in Illustrator, which makes no sense. And I don't think they changed it in InDesign, which makes no sense. And I don't think they changed it in Premiere, which makes no sense. It's like, okay, so you got one anomalous thing that you did in one pro. It doesn't make any sense. Does that make sense? But whatever. There's a lot of stuff that Adobe does. It's weird. Okay. And then there's a couple of other ones in here. Vertical type tool does exactly that. Vertical type. I don't care about these right now. But that's, that's basically it, right? And then there's also going to be things you're going to find out with type. Like, let's see if we can go. We probably can do that. There's certain things when type it's called live type, okay? Live type just means that I can do what I just said. I can select it and I can change the type. If I go here, so everybody understands that this is active type, correct? So let's get rid of this one. But if I go here and I right click here, or I can do it up here under type, rasterize type layer. If you notice the little T went away, now this is just a shape. So I can't double click it anymore and change the type. But there's going to be other things I can do that I couldn't do when it was type. And we'll talk about this later, but like I can come in here and start, transforming it. It probably wouldn't let me do that when it was active. There's just certain things that it won't let you do when it's active type. Okay. So sometimes you have to rasterize it. When you rasterize it, unless it's a real simple thing and you can just recreate it, I always make, and if you, by the way, if you want a copy of a layer, here's the layer, you have your little plus tool here that we made a layer with. I can just drag it onto that plus tool and it'll create a new layer. So if it's something that's critical and I'm gonna rasterize it, I'll save another version, or I'll save the original layer that's active, and then I'll rasterize the other one if it's something complicated. Okay.
Are you saying you can only like go one way? So like once you start changing it, you can't really go back and do it.
Once you
You can't-
rasterize the layer, you can't go back to active type.
Okay, got it.
Unless, you Command Z'd out of it, but at some point that's not an option either, right? And by the way, to that point, you also have up here, one of your palettes is history. And here's all your moves you've made. You see them?
Mhm.
So if I keep going backwards, I can go backwards all the way to where I started, right? And by the way, this, I can turn it off. I can touch the bar for my work path, and so I can see it, or I can do that and so it's not, I'm not looking at it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but that's just like a visual history, right? You can't actually
Yeah.
go back to that point and do it again.
You
Okay.
can just keep going and eliminating them.
Okay.
I don't
Got
know.
it. Thank you.
I don't know if you can go back, because I never have, and like just take out one thing. You probably can.
Wow.
Like go back and jump over. I'll check. Actually, I never do that, but I can't imagine you can't do that. But you can go back and just, reverse out of it. It's just Command Z, but it's going back further, and you can see every step.
Yeah, that's nice to see. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So let's look at. That all makes sense, correct? No questions?
With the history, is that something that we would want to save as part of the file, or
It
not
saves it
really?
automatically. Well,
It saves it
no.
automatically.
Once you save the file and close it, when you open it back up, I think the history's gone.
Okay, very well.
I think it's only active when you're actually working in it. Let's get rid of this, because we're just going to do a simple exercise. Oh, there's one other thing. Sorry. So let's go print, tabloid, 72. Now I'm going to go horizontal. I like horizontals for some reason. And I'm going to make a new layer. Right here is your gradient tool. Okay. So if I go and make a selection, let's do this. And then I pick my gradient tool. Okay. See this up here? This little thing in the control bar? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So it's showing my foreground color, correct? Because it's always going to go off your foreground color, unless you go into preferences and change it or whatever. And then if you notice, it's showing my checkerboard pattern over to the right. Do you see that?
Yes.
That means it's going from my color to nothing, to transparent. Okay. So if I take this tool now and I drag it, it'll give me a nice clean gradient, right? And I can also, there's different ones. So you can come into here and go black and white. There's a bunch of them in here. They put them all into categories now. They didn't used to do that. There's the pink one. Here's this one. And then you can make custom ones and all that. Oranges, so it's just all these options. I tend to use this one the most foreground and transparent, and we'll use a lot of the black and white one. That's weird. It doesn't have, that's weird. It should have two versions of the black and white one. Huh, that's interesting. I probably need to reset it. Anyway, okay. Because we'll use the black and white one quite a bit, okay? Really simple tool. By the way, if you hold, if you're using your gradient tool and you hold, you got, by the way, if you notice, it wasn't letting me do anything because I didn't have any layer selected. So if you go in here and you go, how come I, see how it's giving me that no symbol? So if you come in here and you get that and you go, why can't I do anything? It's probably because you don't have a layer selected. Does that make sense? Also, when I'm dragging this, if I hold shift, it's going to constrain that straight up and down, which you'll see with a whole bunch of tools in here, which you've probably seen in other programs. Okay. Does that all make sense? Yeah.
Can you control the gradient?
In what way?
Like how light and dark, or how, you know, how much it goes to a certain.
Well, if I was going to do that, I would probably, yes, you can up to a point, but hang on. If I was going to do that, let's make it foreground to transparent. Also, another thing I can do is I could pull this. Let's go. And then right here on my layers palette, if I just put this on its own layer, if you notice right here, it's got an opacity thing.
Okay.
And I'm just going to go, and I could pull the opacity down.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Okay. So would you use this for like big areas or for detail work, or either way?
Yeah.
Anything.
Well, actually, look, another thing, let's just look at this. I'm going to jump ahead a little. I could use it for things like this. I mean, I can use it from, you're going to see, we're going to use it for a lot of things, but let's go over here. One of the things that, so this is the file that I gave you guys to download. Like if I make a layer here and I go, let's take this red. Let's just take this red. And this gives me a chance to talk about this anyway. So in your layers palette, you have overlays. You see them right here? All these are overlays. Okay. We're going to use those a lot. Okay. Because I think they're really handy. But like if I take this and I go, I'm on an overlay on a layer over it, and I'm going to go, I'm just going to go select the whole thing. And then I'm going to grab my gradient, and then I'm going to pull it down. And then I'm going to go to my overlays right here, and I'm going to try and find something that's cool. Which I do this all the time on stuff. Like that's kind of cool. That's kind of cool right there. Right? So it just kind of tints my, you know, and it can be more extreme if I keep going through here.
Well, that's similar to using like a red filter in photography, right? And different kinds of filters on your lenses, but
Sort
doing
of.
it in Photoshop
Yeah.
instead.
Yeah. That's obviously horrible. That's kind of interesting. But I like this one, wherever it was. That one. That's just kind of nice, right? Now, look, here's another thing. I'm jumping ahead, but now that I have this color, I could go up here to image and go to, where is it? Where the hell did I lose that? Hang on. There it is, Hue Saturation. And this will give me this, and I'll talk about this later, so don't worry about this, okay? I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit. But I could go, well, I don't really know if I like the red, so I could go up here to the hue slider and slide through different colors and go, oh, maybe I like that really blue thing. And then right here, I can saturate it or desaturate it. And then here, I can lighten it or darken it. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So like that's kind of interesting right there a little bit. So it's one way I would use the, in a broad way, a way that I might use a gradient. Okay.
Thank you.
And then if you look here, that's the original, that's that one. And that, I mean, overlays are your friend, man. They do a lot of really cool things. And I always, I know this sounds weird, but I think it's important. If you're an illustrator or anything like that, or even a photographer, a lot of times I have certain things I go to like that are a little bit random. Like I've been using overlays obviously for 1,000 years. I can't tell you what each one of them does. And part of the reason for that is it depends on what I put over the thing that's under. So if this is purple and neon green, and I do this same red filter over it, it's going to look different because there's different colors underneath it. And each overlay is interacting with whatever's underneath it based on what this is and based on what this is. So what I tend to do is just roll through them. And a lot of times, especially like if I'm working on painting or something, I might get it to a certain point where I go, I kind of like this, but then I'll just go, screw it. I'm going to throw like orange over it. I'm going to go through all the overlays. And sometimes it'll give me something interesting. And the reason I like that is because when you're painting traditionally or whatever, you have certain happy accidents that happen, little things that sort of happen. And I like those things. Okay. It's the same thing with a camera. You might get light leak, or you might get, with film cameras, you used to get a lot of artifacts. Okay. You might have the film speed at a certain setting. It's getting a little bit of graininess, you know, just all these sort of analog things that used to happen. And at first, what I didn't like about the computer is that I'd go, well, if I ask it to give me a perfect circle, it gives me a perfect circle, you know, which by the way is really good. But at the same time, I go, I don't like that. I like that I'm doing a bunch of drawings and all of a sudden I make a wrong mark and I go, oh, that's kind of cool. And I start going down that rabbit hole. It leads me creatively somewhere. Okay. Whereas I felt with the computer, it didn't. Well, there is a lot of things. There's a lot of things actually that do make the computer more of a, I like to look at everything I work with. I don't care if it's a pencil or a computer, is sort of a collaborator. Does that make sense? I want this thing to collaborate with me a little bit. I want to make things like this where I just go, I'm going to try this and see what happens. And a lot of times I get, and it's a bunch of them I'll talk about as we go along, of things that I try to sort of randomize my whatever I'm working on, whether it's a painting or usually it's a digital painting or something. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I'm trying to put these ideas together too. So can you put gradients, and let's say I use the pen tool and I selected one of these buildings. Can I put a different gradient on it and kind of just see how they layer on top of each other? Almost like glazes, I guess is what you're kind of talking about too. Okay.
Are you a painter?
Just a little bit, just a little bit. So,
Yeah, you could totally glaze.
Okay. Okay.
I don't know, you know, if I go here and I'm going to make okay, so I'm going to talk about this in a second, but I'm going to make some really crappy selections here. Don't make crappy selections. But if I took this, and I'll just do part of it, and I make this selection using the Polygon Lasso Tool, which we just talked about. Okay, there's my selection. You see it?
Yep. Okay.
So now I'm going to go, I got this layer, but now I'm going to make another layer. And now I'm going to go back to my red. I'm going to go to my gradient. And then I'm going to go, oops, hang on. And then I'm going to go to my overlays again and start going, okay, what looks cool?
Oh, wow. So now you got a lot of control. Okay. I like this. This is.
So I could find something like maybe like that, or I could even go, okay, I got all this cool, so I want to really pop the warmth out of it. Let's say I go, I like this oversaturated kind of idea, right?
Okay.
Then again, I could come up here and go, well, it's a little too much. So I'm going to go to my opacity and pull it down a little bit. So it's not, you know, so now it's just tinting it, but it's not so overkill. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally does. Thank you.
Okay. So now let's look at this. If you notice, this is a JPEG. So it opened it, and the background is the image. Does that make sense? So let's look at something. Let's zero back our swatches, and I'm going to go select an area, and I'm going to go delete. It doesn't delete. Okay. Let's do it again. Delete, and it's going contents, background color. So it's going to fill. So I'm going, okay, whatever, fill, right? It's a background layer, so it's locked. Does that make sense? But if I unlock this and I go delete, now it pokes a hole in it right through into transparency. Does that make sense? Okay. And another thing, if I go, so I've got this defaulted, right? Foreground black, background white. So now if I go, if I go, I'm going to crop this. Oh, hang on. Let's go back. I want to get it back there to background. So now if I want to crop this, and I'm holding option, so it'll go from the center out. It fills the background with white because the background right here is white. Does that make sense? So when it's on background and the layers are like that, it's going to fill it with white because it's just going, it's just expanding the idea of that white background. If I change this, let's change this background color to red. So red. Then I'm going to flip it right here to my background color, and I do the same thing and I crop it. It'll fill it with red. So it's just going to fill whatever the background color is, okay? But again, I don't usually want it to do that. So I'm usually going to go click here or double click this and change the word, but I'm going to just click there. And now it's not locked to the background. It's not locked at all. Does that make sense? So I can go move it around. I can do whatever I want. Does that make sense? So what I'm going to want you guys to do is this. But by the way, okay, so I don't care which building you take, and I don't care about a super clean selection, but I do want you to do 2 selections here. So I'm just going to use my Polygon Lasso tool because I don't expect you guys to get all these little ledges. You see that? I don't care about that. Okay. But I'm going to take my Polygon Lasso tool because this is basically a square shape. And I'm going to go click, click, click. And boom. Okay. So now we're going to go, I'm going to go Command X. We all know what that is. Cut, correct? Yeah. I'm going to go Command X. Oops. I'm not on the layer. Command X. And it just cuts a hole in it. Okay. Does that make sense? Then I'm going to go Command V to paste it. And you see it pastes it on its own layer, which is actually really handy. And then I'm going to go with my Move tool. I'm going to put this. Okay, let's do this. Here's what I'm going to want you to do. Go back onto this layer. I'm going to make a copy of it just so I have a safety. And then take your clone stamp tool. I'm going to use a soft edge, like I said. I'm going to drop the opacity down a little bit. Again, I don't care if this is super clean. Does that make sense? I don't care about that. And by the way, when I say that, these are exercises that I want you to do. It doesn't mean I want them half-assed, but I don't want you sitting around because you'll just get frustrated right now. All I want you to do is start understanding selections and backgrounds and foreground, all that. Okay. So I'm going to select this over here. And I'm going to start painting this in. Now you'll notice if I go too far over here, oops, let's do it again. If I go too far over here, I'll start grabbing that building. You see that? I don't want to do that. Another thing sometimes I'll do, let's just do this. Another thing sometimes I'll do is I'll make another layer and I'll just fill it with white. Oops. just so I can see it. And then I'll go back to my other layer. Just so I don't have that transparency, so I have something to gauge what I'm doing. I'm going to pull this over. So basically what I want you to do is just come in here and fill this back in. And again, I don't care if it's a perfect selection. You see, I'm making a pretty lousy selection. You know, maybe I'll come up here and grab this. Try and make it just sort of look reasonable. I'm not really that worried about it. Does that make sense? And then I want to take, and again, see, I just grabbed some of the building. I would never do it like this, by the way. So I want you to play around with it a bit. Okay, a lot of these things, what I want you guys to understand when we're doing a simple exercise like this, don't get all stressed out about it. I want you to play in this. Okay, start getting your hands wet. And then when we come back in tomorrow, whatever you're having problems with, I'll help you solve. Does that make sense? So I mean, don't get all uptight about it, okay? Okay,
So
go ahead.
You want us to go ahead and make it like blendable, like if there was nothing there, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you and like I said, I'm not doing a great job of it. And again, it's an exercise. I don't care. It's more about, I just want, you know, and you could fill it with some of this, you know, whatever. Okay. I'm just going to make a half-ass thing here and just fill it. What I want to know is, I'm really screwing that up, but what I want to know is that you understood how the clone stamp tool works, how to make a selection. And then we're going to take this, and I don't care, I don't care which building you use, it doesn't matter to me, but I'm going to take this one, let's say, and I'm going to put it further back. I don't care about the perspective. I don't care about any of that stuff. I want to put it further back, maybe back there somewhere. Now, another thing you could do, if you have something, you know, like let's say if we put it back here, let's say. And again, I don't care about this perspective down here and all that, saying a perspective class. What I can do here on my layers, I could reduce the opacity here and see how I can see through it. I could go, I'm going to just select the side of this building right here. Hang on. I need to make it a little less transparent. Yeah. And then I could select this. And I'm just going to go delete. And then I'm going to come back up here and amp up my opacity again. But here's what I'm going to do. I left something over here. Hang on. Because it's further back now, I'm going to go, I could, you know, I don't want to see through it. So if I go like that, I could reduce it, which you could do. I don't care for this. But one little thing that we'll just talk about real quick is adjustments. There's 3 that we're going to go into very quickly. Adjust levels, hue saturation, which I just showed you a few minutes ago, but don't worry about it. And I think it's brightness contrast, I think. But let's go right here to adjustments and go levels. And levels basically is just lighter or darker, okay? And if you look here, you've got a slider, mid-tone, lights, darks, okay? So I'm gonna go to the mid-tones, let's try that. And I'm just gonna lighten up this building. Because I could also do it up here. Brightness, contrast, and brighten up the brightness. You know, it's going to get less saturated and all that stuff as it goes back in space. Does that make sense? You don't have to do that. If you want to, you can. And, you know, and I just want to move one and I want to fill something with your clone stamp tool. Does that make sense? And here's the other thing. I want you to make a selection I usually use this one with your pen tool. So now okay, why am I using my pen tool now? It's a more complex selection. Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to go click. Again, I don't care about a perfect selection. What I care, let's do this actually. I'm going to go here. And then I have to go back over to my path, click the window, command click the window, not over here, not the word, the window. And then go command, let's just do C this time. Oops, I'm on the wrong layer. I got to go back to my original layer. And then V. And now I've got that selection. And that's all I care about. I just want you to use the pen tool for a selection, for a more complex selection, something with a curve in it. And then what the other stuff that I just did. Does that make sense? Simple? I think it's pretty simple, yeah? Question?
How do we have to label the files?
Your name. Yeah?
Do you want a Photoshop file or do you just want a JPEG?
That's a good question. Photoshop file.
Okay.
Okay, so look, when this was a JPEG, because it started as a JPEG, if I didn't put any layers in it and it remained flat, when I resave it, when I save it again, it's going to stay a JPEG. Does that make sense? Once I make a layer on it, it can't be a JPEG anymore. JPEG has to be flat with that background layer. That's it. Okay. Now I've created layers. So when I go command save on your computer, it's going to give me this. And it defaulted to PSD, which is Photoshop's native format, correct? Yeah. And then, you know, you have all these options here, but Photoshop, okay? And then you can go save. It'll usually, I think it saves the original JPEG too. Let me see. Yeah, there's the JPEG. Let's see. It's going to give you that. Say okay. Yeah, and it saved Cityscape JPEG. That's my original. And then it saved my PSD. Does that make sense? And I don't care how you mix and match this. I don't care. Is that, you don't have to do exactly the way I did it. I just want you to use the pen tool. And the reason I want the PSD, you know, so I can see how you're working. Does that make sense? Whatever you're going to have problems with, that's what we'll go over tomorrow. Yeah?
I have a clarifying question.
Sure.
Okay, so you want us to move one building and then fill in the whole. That's one of the things.
Yeah.
And then you would like us to make a complex selection with the pen tool. So we grab like a curved area of some kind and just move it.
Yeah.
Or copy it.
That's it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Once you have it, and then you got to go to your palettes window and make that work path a selection. Because where people get screwed up, and also you got to be careful too. Watch as you start making layers, watch which ones you're on, because like you can't, I think you can now, but I don't want to do it yet. You have to stamp tool on the layer you're stamping. Okay. So what we're going to start doing, hang on, let me see. I know you can do it now, I think. Yeah. So if you look at here, okay, so you can do it here. So let's look at this real quick. Actually, I should just talk about this real quick. How it's always been with Photoshop. Let's open the same one. How it's always been with Photoshop, when you're using the stamp tool, you have to do it on the layer you're on. Okay. And this is another one of those things you're going to see over and over again now in Photoshop. Okay. So when I go to my stamp tool now and I go across here, here's my opacity, here's my overlays, there's overlays in various places besides just, and these overlays here are the same as the ones in your layers palette, but we'll talk about that later. If you go all the way over here, it says current or sample, current, and below. So what that means is sample the layer. Let's see if we can do it. Yeah. So now what I can do, you didn't used to be able to do this. So you guys should do it this way. I can come in here and I can sample this on a new layer, right? I don't have to be on the layer. That's called non-destructive editing. And we're going to talk about that a lot in here. And we're going to try and do as much of it as we can. Okay. Most things in Illustrator or Photoshop now have been, you know, they've thought about that. Okay. And when you see, okay, so what it's saying is sample current and below, which means it's just sampling this layer. Right. And now if I make a mistake or I don't like it, I can just go, I don't like that. And I can go select all and delete it, which you couldn't do before. Okay. It's really handy. Okay. And then it has all layers. So it can sample all the layers. That's a different thing. We just want to sample the current layer, which is the layer we're on, and below. Okay. Which means I'm on a layer. I'm not destroying my original image and I can adjust away. Okay. We're going to talk about that a lot, and we're going to work non-destructively as much as we can. So when you should actually work for this project, make a new layer on above, and then put current, sample, and below. Does that make sense? And then we can work non-destructively. Yeah? Everybody's understanding? Hang on, I got to do a screen grab. Because I am missing 2 people.
No, I'm here.
I should have 18 and I have 16. By the way, what I do is, just so you know, because sometimes I get this where all of a sudden somebody will drop off. I'll go back and find out who it is. I'm marking you out. Okay. If you're not on my list, I mark you out.
Professor, could you just go over that new layer and current sample? Is that what you actually want us to name the layers?
Hang on, I'll tell you right now. Okay. Who asked that?
You say.
Okay. This, I don't care what you name your layer.
Oh,
Okay. All I'm doing is I'm making a new layer. You might want to, here's what I would do. I would name it something that makes sense to you. Okay. So I would probably put stamp layer, you know, so I know like, oh, that's a layer I'm working on with the stamp tool. Okay.
Okay.
I think when you're working, I think really the best thing to do is name files or layers or whatever, what makes sense to you. Okay. Because when you start getting into complex files where you have a lot of layers, it can really get confusing. Okay. Now we'll talk about groups. We can make group folders. That's simple. But even with group folders for me, I mean, it can work really well if I'm going, okay, this is all my foliage layer or foliage layers, and I put them all in a group. And then here's my figure layer, and I put all those in a folder. That's great, right? What I tend to do is but all those layers, I try and name them. And sometimes the naming conventions look really stupid just because it works for my brain. Now, the other thing is if I'm working with other people, obviously, I'm going to try and name them something that isn't completely indecipherable. You know what I mean? I'll try and name them something very straightforward where somebody else is going to, because a lot of times when you're working, you'll hand files off to other people and they've got to work on them. Okay. And if all my layers are like weird Mike thinking, they're going to go, what is this? Like, I don't know what this is. You know what I mean? Because I've gotten files like that and it's kind of a pain in the ass. And one thing you always want to think about from a work perspective is you're always in a pipeline. Okay. And I think I've talked about this, but you're always in a pipeline. And the way I always tried to look at it, it doesn't matter if I'm the creative director of the pipeline, it doesn't matter. Everybody, whenever you're working, your stuff's going to go to somebody. So even if I'm the director, I'm going to get all the stuff and direct it through the group. And then I'm going to go, okay, now I'm handing this off to production or whoever I'm handing it off to. I want to make sure that and let's say you're the modeler. Okay. Or let's say a better example, somebody who's designing the product and it's all sketched out and all that kind of stuff. And now you've got turns, right? You've done turns, and I'm going to hand those turns off to a modeler, let's say. Okay. I want to make sure that everything in my packet that I hand off to that modeler is spot on done. Does that make sense? Because that keeps your pipeline going. It makes you valuable, because here's the two things that'll happen. If you go in there and you don't do that, and the modeler has to go, what's going on here? I can't model that. Hey man, you got undercuts in here. We can't manufacture that. It's not going to be able to be moldable. You know, all that stuff, right? They're going to be very quick to go to whoever the director is and go, that guy sucks. And he's making a bunch of work for me and I don't like it. I'm having to correct that work, right? You're gone. Okay. But if you do the opposite, where you're handing people off things that are very finished, complete, and they feel like they can just jump in and do their job, they're going to love you and say the opposite. When cuts are happening, they're going to go, don't lose that person, man, because that person kicks ass and makes my life easier. It's all about that. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
It's all about making people's lives easier, but it's also just about, pipeline. That pipeline has to keep working very efficiently. Okay. And if it's not doing that, it bottlenecks. Okay. And you don't want it to be bottlenecking on your desk. Does that make sense? Okay. And people,
Would you describe a general workflow then to say, like, how we're doing the gradients, which would maybe be the sky, or would that be like layer number one, work big to small? Is that in
well,
general?
I always work big to small.
Okay.
I think that just works across the board. Yeah. If you start going into, it depends on what you're doing. Well, even if it's photography, if you're doing whatever you call it, correcting photography, if you go in and you start going, okay, I want to start going in and fixing every little blemish on the face or whatever, I don't know, something like that too fast, when you're like, well, what's the big idea here? You know what I mean? What's the look you're going to go for? Now, I might go in there actually in the beginning and go, I want to clean up the face and all that kind of stuff. And I want to help the lighting and all that kind of thing. That I might, but then I'm going to go, to the bigger picture and go, okay, I'm going to do an overlay here. I want to do maybe a monochromatic color. Maybe I'm going to do a layer mask and I'm going to fade out some of the face and let the sky come through. And those are my big ideas. Then I'll work the big ideas into this, and then I get into my smaller ideas. Okay. Because it's that old cliche. Like if you're building a house, it's got to have a strong foundation. Otherwise it just doesn't work. Okay. And, you see it all the time with painting, you see it all the time with design, see it all the time with illustration, see it all the time with graphic design, where they don't build any foundation and everything disconnects. Does that make sense? You need stuff that locks the whole idea together first. You need an idea. So I think big to small is always the best solution. Okay. Like I said, it might be a little bit different with this, because I'm going to go, well, I do want to clean up the face and everything. Ideally, by the way, when you're doing like photo correction, and I can't even think of a situation where you wouldn't correct a photo. I don't care how good it is. Okay. It's just in today's thing, you're always gonna, and sometimes it's just about very simple things. It might be a really great photo, but there's just always going to be little things in there. And ideally, you don't want anybody to know you did it. You know what I mean? You want it to just look like a great photo of somebody. Okay. My girlfriend used to work for RCC, my ex-girlfriend, and she would do a lot of that with biopics and things like that. And in that organization, they go, hey, here's the speaker. It's going to be here on Friday night. He's some prestigious person or whatever. And some jerk off from campus took a picture of them with their camera phone. You know what I mean? And in broad daylight or whatever, just bad lighting and stuff. And it's like, you can't let that be the photo. Does that make sense? So she always called it digital plastic surgery. So she'd go in and just, clean it up, make it look professional, adjust the lighting, whatever had to be done. And, adjust those harsh shadows and all those kind of things, blemishes, all that kind of stuff. You don't want to overdo it, but you just want it to look like a pro photo. Does that make sense? Okay. And anything I've ever had to do, I haven't had to do that much of photography. I have a little bit when I was doing package design. You got to be really careful how you do that because it can really get out of control and look really Photoshoppy. You know what I mean? Looks really Photoshop. Like I see it all the time with people who like over smooth out the face on somebody. You know what I mean? And it just looks ridiculous. It looks totally airbrushed. You know what I mean? And it looks like, it just looks terrible. You know what I mean? So you got to think about combination. And as we go along, it'll make more sense. You got to think about combinations of tools that we're using and things like that. Yeah. Does that make sense, you guys? Questions? We're good. We know what we're doing.
Does it matter the size of the file save when we save the file?
This file is, let me see. It's 72. You can just save it as 72.
All right.
It already is. So it'll just save it as 72. Does that make sense?
Yes.
By the way, in this class, don't save anything at 300. Okay. And here's what else. As soon as I put up this video and the Zoom link, now there'll be a little red bolded folder word down at the bottom of everything. I always put it at the very bottom. It's bolded. It says folder. You click that, it will take you to Google Drive. Okay. You will dump your files in there. Okay. You have to be signed into Google Drive and then you can just drag them in. Okay. So if it's not letting you drag them in, you're probably not signed in. If you don't have a Google account, make one. They're free. Okay. Once you make a Google email or whatever, you have access to everything. Does that make sense? And I want them in there by a half an hour before class. So I'll put in the what's a half an hour before 10:40?
10:10.
10:10.
Okay, it'll by 10:10. Okay, at 10:10 I go in and I shut that folder off. Okay, and you won't be able to have access to it anymore. Again, I have to do that for myself organizationally. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, and I don't like it when people go, "Oh, I put it in 5 minutes for and it was still uploading." I don't care. I don't think it's that hard to put something into a folder a half hour before class. I think that's pretty easy. And by the way, I'll open it as soon as I put it up. You can put it anytime you want. Okay. I don't have a time limit before. I just want to shut it off at 10:10. Yeah. I just showed how bad my math skills are. I'm not happy about. Okay. Any questions? You're probably going to run into problems. We will solve them tomorrow. Yeah. Again, normally we'd be sitting in class. I go, okay, everybody start. And I just go around and, correct them there. I can't do that in here right now. What else? I think that's it. You have the file. You should be able to just go click it and download it. You can use something else if you want, by the way. I don't care. If you want to use a different image, go ahead. Just don't use something that's this big. Okay. Use a reasonable size image. I probably should have shrunk this one. It's a little big, but it's not a big fat file, so it should be fine. And I think that's it. Yeah. Okay, you guys. Then I'll let you go. If I don't have any questions, no questions, right? Okay. All right, you guys. I'll talk to you in the morning, 10:40.
Thank you very much.
All right.
We will get a copy of the video, correct?
Yeah, I'll edit it right now.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Oh, great. Okay. Thanks a lot.
Oh, Professor.